So Shari and Michael have joined me again today as we continue our journey into Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot. This time we are covering letter 13, which is on death. So I'm going to yes. So I'm going to begin this conversation today by asking you both this question. Did the serpent lie?
Maybe the dumb person should go first. That would be me.
Which is actually the question that Tomberg begins this chapter with. So I thought it was appropriate enough for us to just dive in right there.
All right.
I'm going to say no.
You want to elaborate?
No, I want Michael to answer.
Yes. The serpent lied.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
So let's try to bring
no, but let's qualify that.
Depends on what your definition of lie is.
Well,
right?
the die part was a lie.
It depends on which world you live in. That's what
you will not die. I mean, you will not die physically. You will, right? So this is how I think this is how demons work. This is equivocation, right? Which is what the Jesuits are really good at. So yes.
Well, that's why I'm really glad that you guys gave different answers, because that's really the nature of it, right? Is like it's kind of like lie. It's a lie that's not lying, but really, I would say so. Technically, like Shari gave the right answer in terms of technically, was it a lie? Shari's answer is right. No. Was the spirit of what it was a lie? Michael's answer, yes.
Yeah, and in fact, you ever see? I'm sure you have seen Hamlet, right? Have you seen Hamlet?
Oh yeah.
You know the graveyard scene where Hamlet's asking the gravedigger, "Whose grave is it?" "For no man, sir." "For what woman then?" "No woman either, sir." "Well, whose grave is it?" "It's mine." "Well, it can't be for yours because you're alive, and a grave is for the dead, not for the quick." He goes, "Well, it's my grave because I made it, yet it's not for any man or for any woman. It's because it's for someone who used to be a woman." It's Ophelia's grave, right?
Beautiful.
And then Hamlet says, "We have to play it by the card, or equivocation will do us in," because it's Shakespeare's kind of commentary on Jesuit equivocation, right? Which is what they would do in trials for treason against the queen.
Is that what Peterson's doing when he says, "What do you mean by God and what do you mean by belief?" Is that equivocation?
No, I think he's trying to get people to come to terms.
Yeah, I think he's trying to get people to realize their own equivocation.
Right.
Well, their own glittering generalities, right? You say these things and you think you know what it means.
Right.
And that reminds me, I'm not gonna equivocate, but because I wrote about this in Sophia in Exile on the Holy Grail.
Yes.
So I think actually we should probably set up a time for us to talk with that guy over the Regeneration podcast about the Holy Grail.
That would be great.
Let's do it.
Because I kept thinking you guys wanted to say we should do a joint thing. And
yeah, that's the perfect topic. Let's do it.
That would be the topic.
That would mean I have to read the story. I still haven't read it.
You could read Martin Shaw's retelling of the Parsifal. I think that would give you a good sense.
Okay.
It's not too long.
But I want to qualify why I said it wasn't a lie.
Okay.
Because what I gather from the whole chapter is that there are these, like, we live in a mirror. We live in this upside down world, right?
Wonderland.
Which is the world of the serpent. And in that world, he's not lying.
Right. Correct.
You live in the world of the serpent. But if you were God, you would see it right side up, right? Where how do I say this? Well, death is life. Like everything gets flipped, right? So I don't know. I find that a kind of a good, for me personally, to keep in mind that I need to in order to understand what God is doing, I have to flip everything, flip it, well, for me, upside down, but I'm actually in the upside down.
But Michael's still right too, though, because the kind of life that the kind of life that you can have according to the principle of immortality that the serpent offers, which is what the machine is working toward right now as we speak, is actually not life. And we know this because Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Like, there is no life outside of him. Right. The life that is apart from Christ is not life.
And the thing that believes that it will not die strives towards immortality, which is what the machine is all about. It's about immortality.
I'm just having a moment right here, noticing how my entire week just coalesced in this conversation. Because well, really, because this is what I was talking about with David Bentley Hart yesterday.
Oh, I just had it queued up to watch. I hadn't seen it yet.
This is what we were talking about, because that's what his book Kanogaya is about. He correct me on the pronunciation.
It's I heard that. I watched that part.
But you knew he was going to do it, but
he can't not do it.
It's his thing, right? But that's what the book's about, really, is the constructed world versus the real world.
Right.
Right. And our perception of what is real is usually jacked up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was just,
how did your whole week coalesce in that moment? Like,
well, and plus a week ago, we were talking about I was talking with Robert Powell,
right.
And about this very translation of this book.
Right.
And how that came along. So it's all coming together right now. And plus, a big thing we talked about with David yesterday was memory, which is a huge theme in this chapter, right?
Huge theme in here.
Yes.
It was a little bit hard for me to follow because they're, like I was really desperately trying to keep it sorted. So I don't know if I understood everything that he was talking about there. I can say that I was really, really excited to hear the way he talked about reincarnation here, because those are my sentiments precisely when it comes to reincarnation.
Right.
But we don't have to go there right now, but I just wanted to say that.
Well, let's talk about memory. Let's talk about memory, because we talked about the machine. And so he talks about memory in 4 forms, right? He says that there's automatic memory, there's logical memory, there's moral memory, and then finally there's vertical or revelatory memory. And the mechanical memory is the memory that is associated with the machine.
Yeah.
It's that which happens just automatically when you're not really where you're not, he says, interestingly enough, you're not doing anything.
Right.
It's also interesting that he says that if you practice the moral and the vertical memory, that you won't have problems with the mechanical memory, like when in regards to dementia or senility.
At that, I will say, of all the things that he said in this book, that was the one that I had the most trouble with. And that was the one I would want to interrogate him on, because, and here's why. It's very personal for me, because my grandfather is like the dearest person, like the whole person I've held dearest in my life. Like, that's like, he was like, I was very close to my grandfather. And I think I kind of agree with him, but I think he could have expressed himself more clearly. Let me put it this way, because his moral memory was intact and his vertical memory was intact. His mechanical and logical memory were what failed. And if Tomberg gives me that qualification, then I will agree with what he says. And here's the interesting thing. I can give you a contrast between my grandfather in his senility as he was suffering from Alzheimer's, and there was a nun on his same ward, right? This nun was angry at everyone all the time and had a nasty temperament. My grandfather did nothing but smile and laugh and be full of joy the entire time. So it was hard for watching his memories slip was hard for us, but it wasn't hard for him. It was hard for us because we were losing the connection to what we had, but he was still connected to a source of joy. Right. That gave him just immense pleasure in the simplest things.
But here's the thing, though, Nate, and I think this is important. When Tomberg wrote those words in the 1960s, early 1960s, there wasn't dementia like we have it now, or Alzheimer's.
Right.
Which I think both of those things are are actually, no one will ever. I've talked to my mom. My mom has dementia. She's 15 feet away from me. That I'm convinced that the reason there's so much dementia, in particular in this country, is because of lousy diet and cooking in aluminum pots for all these years.
The aluminum pots is what my family believes, because my grandfather that's what we believe caused my grandfather's, because he was a chef at the peak of the aluminum pot era.
Mm-hmm.
And was working with them constantly.
Yeah, and I'm certain that's what it is. Though when I mentioned that to my mom's doctor, he's like, "That can't be it. It's just because people are living older for the longer time." I don't know if that's true, man. But I think what that shows us is, if that's the case, and I think it is, that's actually part of the machine.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
It's
right.
And I think, I don't know if we talked about this before, but the medical profession is the machine right now, and the pharmaceutical industry. And what they've done is they've learned how to prolong death, but they sell it as prolonging life.
Right.
Yeah. That's really good. And that's a flip too, right? Like that's actually an upside down world.
That's the serpent's promise, right? If you take this, I will let you live longer.
Well, because it's a life that is a clinging to one's own, which is precisely not life, right? So the life that is the true life is a constant releasing of that and a return.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a complete inversion.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, since we solved all of our current social problems. Yeah.
I guess we could go now.
All right.
Shortest and most efficient Grill Country video yet.
And then,
there you go.
I'm sure we do we want to talk. I think that we were kind of talking about that in connection with mechanical memory. Do we want to explain that, like, conceptually a little bit further? Basically, essentially, a mechanical memory is just like the physical memory that you don't have to do anything for. It's just like what naturally comes to mind.
It's interesting watching that. My mom's dementia is pretty weird, because she's lived with us for 7 years. She rarely calls me by my own name.
Right.
She calls me Brian, which is her twin brother's name.
Right.
And my kids, it's a joke with my kids, like, Dad, Brian, shut up. Go to your room, right? But she's got some things she can remember, which is interesting. I mean, she can remember how to brush her teeth, though she refuses to do it half the time. But she can't remember my name.
Yeah, well, that's because...
And she doesn't know the names of my kids who live in the house.
You know what I think that is? I think it's a quality that she remembers. And there's a quality to you that is the same as the quality of her brother, perhaps. Don't you think? I mean, it doesn't have to be true. Know. It doesn't have to be true.
Well, it's her twin brother, so I think it's the oldest name she's known of a man, in a way.
Well, yeah, that's true.
So that could be. I don't know precisely why.
Yeah, my grandfather didn't remember my name, but he definitely had a memory of me as being a distinct and different person from my father, because he would always warn me about my father. He would be like, "Be careful about that one."
That's funny.
So he still recognized like a kindred spirit in me, and he was always friendly and happy to see me. But he would always if my dad was around, he would always pull me aside and like point out to him and say, "Hey, be wary of that one."
Yeah.
So
my sister has her oldest daughter, Jessie, is very much like me in a lot of the ways that she is. And my sister calls her Jerry half the time. She gets my name and Jessie's name, she puts them together. So the joke is that, when we're all together, that, I'm Shari, she's Tracy, and that's Jerry, her oldest daughter. But there's something about Jessie that reminds my sister of me. And so it gets condensed down to Jerry.
Mm-hmm.
But
no, hey, so to go back to memory,
yeah,
it's interesting. On page 342, he says, "Our empirical experience of death is the disappearance from the physical plane of living beings, right? But we remember them, right?
Right.
And it's interesting. And what I can't remember where I read this, but one of the things is that when a person's soul finally disappears is when the last living person remembers who they were. I can't remember. It's from the Kabbalah, I believe. I can't remember exactly. But you ever see the movie Excalibur?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
I've seen it about a gazillion times. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm talking. Who am I talking to? The Grail.
Yeah. Right.
Whatever.
I have the chant of making memorized. I've seen that enough times.
Oh yeah. But the part. Well, get this. So the part where after Percival brings Arthur the Grail and they're going to go fight Mordred, right? And when Arthur's at Stonehenge and he's kind of praying, wishing that Merlin could be there, and Merlin comes back, he says, "Your love brought me back."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Your love brought me back.
And I think that's true.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's true in the spiritual worlds.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I don't know. Do you?
Well, he talks about this in the context of like that's being like the miracle of the raising of Lazarus from the dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was.
Well, I think it's true. Remember that kind of, so get this. So here's a personal story. I'm divulging a little personal information. And so when I was 18, is in October. In fact, I would think it was this week when I was 18. This girl I had known from childhood. She was in my neighborhood, and we had been friends all through school. And then when she graduated, we started dating. I just fell in love with this girl, but she committed suicide in October of 1980. It must have been, and it was devastating to our circle. In particular, her father would not let any of her old boyfriends come to the funeral because he was blaming them for her. She probably had bipolar disorder or something, but she was blaming them. Or us, I should say. So I couldn't go to the funeral. And so she never was really dead for me in a way, right? I remember my mother went to the funeral, and my mother came home devastated because she loved that girl. Yeah. And she was destroyed by seeing her in a casket. And she was 19. And then a few years later, I was probably in my mid-20s, early 20s. I had a dream that she appeared to me in this building that was on fire, and there were all these souls going past her, but she was like a head taller than the rest of them. And I went to her and I said, "Lisa, it's so nice to see you." I said, "I have a question." And I said, and this is when in my early spiritual seeking years, I said, "What's the difference between Jesus and Krishna?" And she laughed, and I woke up. But then 20 some years later, I was 40, I think. My friend started working at this new job, and he met this girl who looked exactly like Lisa, and it was freaking him out. And he told her one day, she said, "Oh, yeah, she was my aunt." And wow. So she connected me with Lisa's brother, and her brother who was actually my parents' age. So Lisa was like the child who came at the end, and we had like a little memorial service for it at the cemetery where she was interred. And I remember when I got there, I was like, wow, looking at the gravestone, because it looks so old already.
Yeah.
After 20 years. And it was healing for me to do that with them. But so short story long, this last week I was, I can't remember what we were talking about in one of my classes, but I told them the story of this. And I don't know if this happens to you, but upon occasion, I can feel the presence of the dead. And it's like a kind of, I don't know what to call them. I mean, it's not chills, but it's like something runs through my head, kind of. Have you had this happen to you?
Thank you for joining us for our Halloween episode.
I know. Have you had this feeling before? You've ever this happened?
Yeah.
I always think it doesn't happen, that it happens to everybody, but then people go, that's weird. Yeah. But I felt her presence in the classroom when I was talking to the students about her, which was unexpected. And I just felt it a couple of seconds ago too. But I think this, I think there's a truth in Excalibur, and I think Tomberg's getting to it here, that kind of remembering, right? Which if you go to the story of Osiris, right, you're remembered, you have your members put back together.
Yep.
And it's enacted through love.
Yes.
So Michael, when my son was a baby, and I named my son after my grandfather, who I talked about earlier. His name is Kenneth. He's named after my grandfather. When he was a baby, I would walk into his nursery and I would smell my grandfather.
Wow.
Like I would smell like the distinctive smell of my grandfather. I would smell him in the room. And we had this incident one time when he was a toddler. He must have been about 18 months old. And my grandfather kind of like resembled John Wayne, like physically resembled John Wayne, like similar facial features, similar like powerful kind of build. And we were in the supermarket, and my son spontaneously like grabs a Life magazine with John Wayne on the cover off the shelf and like gives us this like knowing look of recognition. That is just like floored me. Like, yeah. So I'm with you. They're here. I'll join you. I'll join you in the crazy talk. People can dismiss it if they want, but there's no reason about lying about our real experiences.
That's right. And what do people expect us to talk about in this show?
Well, I mean, this is exactly the kind of deep remembrance that Tomberg is talking about. He wants us to have this sense of memory, and it's like, well, think about this, like Jesus says of the Eucharist, "Do this in remembrance of me." So it is this deeper sense of memory that he's talking about, the vertical memory.
Doesn't Tomberg talk about the dead visiting you in your sleep? Somewhere in here? Just thinking about that now.
I don't remember that. I remember him using, he talks about, I know he talks a lot about memory.
I think I underlined it, but
memory. He also talks about sleep, because he talks about how forgetting, sleep and death are all like connected to each other.
He talks about, he has a huge, I underlined quite a bit. It's a,
I have the whole damn chapter underlined. I'm going to start erasing.
If there are sections you guys want to share, go for it. I did not have a chance to do any highlighting this time because
I like this part here on page 342. For our whole experience, outer and inner, forgetting, sleep, and death are three manifestations of the same thing, namely the thing which affects disappearance. It is said that sleep is the younger brother of death. It is necessary to add, forgetting is the brother of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Forgetting, sleep, and death are three manifestations differing in degree of a sole principle or force which affects the disappearance of intellectual, psychic, and physical phenomena. Forgetting is to sleep as sleep is to death. Or again, forgetting is to memory as sleep is to consciousness, and sleep is to consciousness as death is to life. So there's, there's a really good example of how I was trying to keep track.
Right.
Forgetting, remembering, sleep, and death, and
right.
One forgets, one goes to sleep, and one dies. One remembers, one awakes, and one is born. I won't read more because it's a lot of. It'll just get you confused if I read more. But I thought it was interesting that forgetting, sleep, and death are three manifestations differing in degree of the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we can talk about that, but I just thought that was interesting.
Well, and he completes that idea when he discusses Lazarus a few pages later.
Right. And recalling, that was great. Like, so when you recall something to memory, it's like when Jesus recalled Lazarus out of the grave.
Mm-hmm. It is. And now no, part of my experience going through consciousness soul, so in my 40s, was that I finally came to the realization that my friends, people I'd known forever and had, been through everything together, remembered things differently than I did.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It's like, wow, you don't remember, and I would have like these significant things that I thought happened to us.
Yeah.
And they're going, I don't remember that.
I know my sister and I have that too. And we did a lot of things together. And so when we recall an event that we were, like, because we hitchhiked around, we hung out, like we lived together basically. And, I fill in blanks for her and she fills in blanks for me when we tell the stories.
That thing you just said, think about that for a minute. That we fill in blanks for each other, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So it's like none of us can call forth the whole.
Yeah.
But we all have pieces of it.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the other thing is that, and I would put this in the category of moral memory a lot of the times, because you have these almost life-defining events that happen that I think reveal your true ego or I, right? That shows you who you really are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
And you don't at the time you don't see what it is, but then when it comes back later in memory, you're going, that's what this was. So for instance, one of these, there was this, remember those Horizons books on, like they have, the one I remember in particular, because I found it years later and it's like finding treasure. There was one on Joan of Arc. It was like they would you'd have them in school libraries, at least in Catholic school libraries. And this one, I remember there was this picture, it was a painting that was reproduced in the book of Saint Michael and Saints Catherine and Margaret appearing to Joan of Arc. And it's like hit me, when as a kid, I was like, wow, that's heavy. Can that happen? And that was probably 11 when I saw this. And that picture lived inside of me for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I was at this used bookstore and I saw the book. This is a cool book. I'm going to take it. And I looked for that picture right away. And I was stunned because the picture didn't look exactly like I remembered it. But what I think happened is it grew inside me. And what happened is that image really planted a seed of where I would eventually become.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no way I would have known that at 11. And even when I found the book, probably in my 30s, I didn't put it quite together then. But now, 60, looking at, aha, this is what happened. This is a thread. I mean, if there's a thread with my relationship to Saint Michael the Archangel that goes through my whole life.
Yeah.
That started right there.
Yeah.
So I'm sure Rudolf Steiner would say, yep.
Yeah.
We're called by Michael, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I just wrote, wasn't in here. I just wrote this week in a blog post about the election in astrology. But the last part of it is the election occurs on the Eastern church calendar on the feast of Saint Michael and the Angels, right? And there's all kinds of sketchy and scary stuff going on astrologically on November 8th, but it's also the feast of Saint Michael.
Yeah.
So which gives me hope, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
As I was listening to you talk, and maybe I'm off my rocker here, but I was seeing I was intuiting a connection between memory, attention, and prayer. That like there's a through line there with those concepts. Do either of you have any thoughts on that? Or
well, I think these are prayers that we don't even know that we utter. Like, I think that happens, when you get to see a through line, like Michael just described, right? When you get to look back over your life, God willing that you live long enough to be able to do that, and you see that happening, you realize that there is a prayer there that actually came from you, but wasn't prayed by you.
For it to be a prayer, don't we need to be being intentional about it though? Because think about how in automatic memory you don't really.
That's a good question.
Right. I think like so in automatic memory, you're not, like as Tomberg says in the chapter, you're not really doing anything, right? Like if you're merely following the natural course of where your automatic memory leads you.
Yeah.
Like, and you're completely in your, which is basically the memory of the flesh. Right.
So what if that realization
it's the physical fleshly memory. There's no levels above it, right? You just follow your fallen instinctive animal programming.
You guys, are you familiar with Simone Weil at all?
Just the name.
No, Simone Weil, one of the things she did, I have two stories that are connected to this. So she had a thing about praying the Lord's Prayer, and she prayed it in Greek because that's how, it's like David Bentley Hart, I'm sure he does too. Those people who are much more intellectually advanced than I am. But so she would
just
pray in
Latin
Greek
for me, sorry.
But she would say, she said that, and try this, boy, sometime. And where she would be praying the prayer, and if she found herself getting distracted, she would go back to the beginning and try to hold her attention for the entire prayer. Boy, try that. It's harder than it sounds. Because I've done it many times. Try to be truly present through every phrase of that prayer. And the other thing, so talk about memory and memorization. And of course, she memorized the poem. The prayer to say it first, but in her, and then I read this as an undergraduate, and then when I was in graduate school, I was researching mysticism and poetry, and I found this story about Simone Weil, who had been given a book of the metaphysical poets, so I did my dissertation on a few of them, and she really fell in love with this poem by George Herbert called Love 3, which is a gorgeous poem. If your listeners, check it out, go look it up, it's on the internet. Love 3 by George Herbert. And what she did is she loved it so much that she translated it into French. And she said in this letter to a priest that, whenever she felt a migraine coming on, she would start to recite this poem to her as a way to relax herself, to prevent the migraine. But then she said that after a while, this recitation took on the virtue of a prayer. And then she said that eventually Christ himself came down and took possession of me during one of these recitations.
Right.
And that's related to what Nate was talking about. So the kind of rote mechanical thing somehow.
I know why, Michael.
He talks about the different bodies,
I know
right?
why, Michael. I know why. I actually know why. So
Nathaniel Hale, answer.
This is why I know. I know because I was into competitive speech, right? And you can only do so much if you are reading a speech and you don't have it memorized, right? When you have any words committed to memory, you can give full breath to the words in a way that makes them come to life. You can see this through the actor's craft on the stage. Like how different are the words on the page in Shakespeare versus those words embodied, fully breathed into life, in motion on the stage with the play being enacted out. Like that is, and prayer, when done properly, can have that same thing, because if you have the prayer committed to memory, it allows you to pay more full attention to how you are breathing those words. And breath is how the word itself comes from God. So that connection to breath is a direct connection to the divine.
And I think he doesn't really explicitly state it here, but I think this is part of what he's getting at when he's talking about the different bodies. The physical body, the etheric body, the astral body, and the ego, right? And so we could say that, that kind of memorization or recitation, that's rote, corresponds to the physical body. But then because of the repetition and the working through it, it gets in the Waldorf education game, rhythm replaces strength, and rhythm, repetition, doing everything at the same time or whatever, moves into the etheric body, which is the life body. And then from there, it moves into the astral body, which is the body of desire and appetite, and connected to our relationship with animals. The animals have an astral body. They don't have an ego. And then for us, it moves from so physical, etheric, astral, and then it comes to the self, the ego, right? And that's what he gets, and that's anthroposophy 101, which is what he's doing here on page 344. And he's talking about the method of subtraction. So you subtract. So what happens, and this is what I think happened with Simone Weil. So the physical activity is like being on a ladder, right? But as you're going up the ladder, you're kicking out the rung underneath you, right? So you start with the physical body, but then you get to the etheric, you kick out the physical rung. Then you go to the etheric and move to the astral, kick out the etheric. You got no place to go but up, right? And then eventually you get to the ego, and after that is the spirit, right? You arrive at, and this is what happened with Simone Weil, with the spiritual experience that she had, that started, there's nothing more physical than a migraine, right?
Well, yeah, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Shari.
I'd like to chime in here.
Go for it.
Because the how do I want to say this now? Like this memory, for example. So there are things that we don't remember, but they're there, right? So hang on a sec. You have this recall ability, and oh man, I don't think I'm going to be able to say this the way I want to.
I believe in you, Shari.
So
me too.
Like we are God's children. Let me put it in those really simple terms, right? So like, Tomberg would probably call it a spiritual body, or I don't know exactly how he would term it. And we have a memory, but we don't remember it, right? So this is why I put forward the idea that, like, what Michael was seeing in that picture as an 11-year-old kid and where he is right now is it is a prayer that was uttered that he wasn't even aware of, because that's who he is, right? And so the who he is moving him in that direction through prayer. Now, it doesn't mean that there is no prayer ever uttered, because at that realization, one utters a prayer of gratitude, right? Because then one is made aware of that process in which they were engaged. And engaged is actually a really good word. It's like a train, you've clicked into something and it's pulling you up that hill, and you don't even know.
It's the connection to your wild twin or guardian angel. That's what it is.
Yeah, or something, like, so it's like,
yeah,
it's the divine prototype of you.
And I think we're going to get to that in the next letter, by the way.
It's that new name thing, Nate, that we talked about. It's who you
always. That's precisely what it is. Yeah, that's the Whitestone name. Yeah, exactly.
You always were.
Yeah.
So I wonder if I can join you, my companions, in a little exercise.
Okay.
And we can invite our listening audience into this too. It's an interesting one. Okay. So I want you to close your eyes.
All right.
Close your eyes, and I want you to try to conjure up what your first memory is. What's your earliest memory? What's the earliest thing you remember? And I want you to think about a couple different things. Okay. First of all, about how old were you? Okay. Secondly, what was the event? And third, from what vantage point do you see this memory? So again, about how old were you? What was the thing that happened or thing you're recalling? And from what vantage point do you see it? Okay. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes.
Okay. Do you want us to share?
I do, if you feel free to.
Shari, do you want to start?
Well, my earliest memory, I'm about 2.5 years old. And my vantage point is actually me. I'm in it. Like I'm not like in recalling the memory, I'm actually in myself.
Mm-hmm.
Does any sense? And I'm coloring and I'm angry because my parents shoved me off to a babysitter. And in those days, in the 60s, you went to someone's house because there was no such thing as a daycare. So you had these, and my sister was in a carriage. So that's how I know how old I was, because she was a baby. And it was a picture of Mary Poppins. It was a Mary Poppins coloring book with the carousel in Mary Poppins on the page. And I took a black crayon and I scratched all over it. I scratched it out because I was angry. Oh. And then the girl said to me, because the woman had 2 teenage daughters, and one of them said to me, "That's really nice." And I remember looking at her going, "You're an idiot."
Really? I'm going to be goth when I grow up.
It's not nice. It isn't at all.
I wasn't trying to be nice.
Oh, goodness gracious. That is...
What I took from that, actually growing up, because I have that memory so clear to me, is never underestimate don't condescend to children. Don't do it, because they're just little adults. That's all they are, So anyway, okay. That's my memory.
How about you, Nate?
So for mine, I must be about 3, because I can tell by the visuals that it was when we were still, before we moved to Longview, we were still in Hoquiam, and the housing projects in Hoquiam. And it's a first person point of view memory. And I remember coloring liver lids with my father to make homemade shrinky dinks for our Christmas tree. So like homemade holiday ornaments. And I can see like my father's hand. I can see my father's hands, but I don't see my father's face or body, other just his hands. I see his hands in the memory. So that must have been like 1974. So I must have been about 3.
Okay. So mine, I was also about 2, and I only know this because my brother was an infant. Yeah. He was just born. My brother was born on November 30th, and my memory takes place around Christmas, right after he was born. And what I think it is, and that's what I remember. So I'm looking, but here's the thing, and I'm looking down on myself from outside, like from the right side, someplace. I can't see my face. Uh-huh. And I'm playing underneath the table at my grandmother's house, because we lived there at the time, with my sister, and we're playing with those little plastic cowboys and Indians, which apparently are culturally inappropriate now, but they were universal toys back in the day. Yeah. Right. And I'm looking down at myself. And then later, it was Christmas Eve, and my parents told me that they talked to Santa Claus for us, which I figured out later I figured out they must have done their Christmas shopping that late, because my brother was only born 3 weeks before. And so we need to go see Santa, but they told us they talked to Santa for us. And then later that night, my dad said, "Don't get up in the middle of the night, because Santa Claus will see you and he'll take all the toys away." So my room was on the first floor, and my parents slept upstairs. And I got up, and my grandmother had put this cardboard Santa Claus outside of my room, which scared the shit out of me, and I ran up the steps to my parents. "He's here. He's going to take the toys back." No. But and I remember my dad laughing in bed. But the thing is, I've done this demonstration, this experiment with every Waldorf class I've ever had when they're about 7th or 8th grade. And when I taught teacher training, I've done it with students there. And when I taught, and I do it often in teaching college. And it's interesting that most people remember it from outside of themselves. And I'm like, well, why? Nobody has an answer, right?
Really?
But there are, I would say, about a quarter of the people see it from inside of their bodies, like you two did.
Yeah, my dreams are always first person too, like in almost invariably.
But yeah, most people see themselves from above somehow.
When they're recalling a memory, when they're recalling something.
I guess we're weird.
But it's it's. And the thing is, almost everyone is about 2 or 3.
Yeah, that I knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is when Steiner would say that's when a child starts to say I.
Actually, I actually discarded all the third person images as I was trying to generate like what was an authentic memory. As you asked the question, it's like anything that I saw as third person, it's like that's from a photograph. And I know it's from a photograph because I'm seeing it in third person. So therefore, I'm not going to share that because I know that's not actually my memory. But because I'm seeing this one first person and I can feel the feelings that I felt and be back in that experience as I'm calling it to memory, then I know this is actually my memory.
The earliest memory I've ever heard from anyone is from my dad. And he was 1 year old and he was being circumcised on the kitchen table.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's traumatic.
Something you never forget.
That's traumatic.
He remembers.
Wow.
It won't be long now. Yeah.
Yeah. He remembers seeing all the tools of the doctor.
Oh my gosh.
And he remembers the floral print of his mother's dress.
You should forgive your father much.
Well, very often.
That is a traumatized person.
Well, very often the earliest memory somebody has is of something traumatic or angry, right? Very often.
Angry. I was really,
and mine was. I think that Santa Claus outside of my room which scared
probably traumatic, especially when he was going to take the toys.
Yeah,
that's really traumatic.
Yeah,
this is so messed up, Dad. Yeah,
yeah,
it's not my fault.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So we've talked a lot about memory, and I think we've kind of actually touched upon in our conversation about memory. We've kind of touched upon all the forms of memory that Tomberg mentions. We've specified what he means by the automatic. The logical memory is simply that memory that you have to exert effort of association in order to bring something into remembrance. And then the moral memory. Do we want to talk about the moral memory or the vertical memory? And then the other question I have is the kind of memory exercise we just engaged in. Which form of memory does that fall under?
I would say that's logical memory, isn't it? It's I have underlined.
I don't think it's just logical memory though.
It's incarnational memory, however we're going to put that, right?
Yeah. At least for me, it felt like it wasn't just like it wasn't because I think incarnational is the right word, which I think incarnational is ultimately, I think that is vertical memory.
Well, it says here,
in a way, yeah.
To moral memory, there is hardly any automism. Well, first of all, I'll read. In logical memory, this is bottom of 345. In logical memory, there is less automism and more conscious effort.
Right.
With respect to moral memory, there is hardly any automism. Here, the remembrance is no longer something which happens, but rather it is an authentic, magical act, although subjective. Mm-hmm. It is love which is at work in moral memory when it recalls things from the past.
Yes.
Here is admiration, respect, friendship, gratitude, affection, and 1,000 other things which have deeply moved you, which rendered things from the past unforgettable.
Okay, so to me, that's moral memory is definitely what was involved in my own recollection.
The more one has loved, the more one remembers through moral memory. I don't know, like I was angry, but maybe I was angry because I felt unloved.
Well, no, I think that's logical memory. I think mine was logical memory too.
Yeah, I think it was logical memory.
But I think my dream or my memories of Lisa, the girl who died.
Yeah,
that's vertical memory.
Yeah,
that's moral memory.
Yeah,
right, because it's based on love and friendship and even I wouldn't call it distress, but in a way, her death, not consciously at the moment, but I think subconsciously it put me on this path toward seeking some answers, some spiritual answers. I mean, I was always a kid like that anyway. I was one holy looking altar boy, despite my behavior off the altar. I was totally into it, but there are, if we look through our biographies, we see these moments where I wouldn't call it destiny, but our true self is revealed to us. Right.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of what I was talking about that unspoken prayer, like here it says on page 347, vertical memory is the more effective to the extent that the three sacred vows, obedience, poverty, and chastity, render the lower man capable of listening to, perceiving, and receiving things from above without distortion. Vertical memory is fundamentally only moral memory carried in its development to a still higher degree. This is why it is only moral purification, which the practice of the three sacred vows entails, right? So if you're practicing those three sacred vows, you are being morally purified. That counts in the case of vertical memory. Intellectual interests as such do not count here.
Yeah. So what time?
It's a pretty fine line, don't you think, between vertical and moral memory?
It's almost 9, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, you asked the time, right?
No, I'm just wondering when my sister gets here. But so before, I don't know if we can move to talking about ghosts.
Sure, yeah, because he talks about that in this chapter. Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it's connected to a lot of the things we've been talking about. Because
we're getting into that
All Souls Day vibe, aren't we?
I want to say one quick thing before that. I think that in this conversation that we've had to this point, I think we have given a really good account to, if anyone is paying very close attention to what we're saying, a very good account of why you should pray for the dead.
Absolutely.
It's contained in the conversation that we just had up to this point.
And in fact, that's for Steiner, that was he thought his most important contribution was the care of the dead. One of his most important contributions.
All right, now let's talk about ghosts as our Halloween episode continues.
That's right.
That's a good one, yeah.
Okay, first of all, who's seen a ghost? Anybody?
I have not.
I'm trying to remember.
Well, wait a minute. Do you think? Okay, well, it depends on what. I mean, some people would count my experience of spelling my grandfather in my son's nursery as seeing a ghost. That's not what I wouldn't call it that.
So here, I haven't. My dad did. He saw his mother. He was really screwing up in life. When I was about 12 or so, and he woke up and his mother was standing over his bed looking at him like, look at you, right? And it kind of woke him up. But Bonnie, my wife, did, and so did my children. So this house, when we were first married, we were renting a house in Ferndale, Michigan, where the woman who lived there before us had died there. And so my son Brendan was probably 3, and I think my son Dylan lived there till he was about 2. And one day Dylan, he was about 1.5 years old, maybe 2 years, and he came out after we put him in bed at 7 or 8 o'clock. He comes out about 10 o'clock. Can you tell that lady to leave me alone? And not long after that, and there was actually this one room in the house was always cold. I'm sure that's where she died. And one time the lady was trying to get Bonnie. I don't know what she was trying to do, but Bonnie was, Michael, struggling to wake up. I said, what was it? It was that lady. You got to bless the house. So we got some holy water, and I think we took care of her. But like he says here, it was an astral shell or an etheric shell that just hung out, just didn't leave quite, right?
He also calls them maniacal because they just kind of have these repetitive things that they do.
Yeah,
he also into some.
So here's the interesting thing is that, like, he also points out that they're electrical, right?
Electrical,
by nature. And if you think back to what he said about electricity being the principle that like drives the energy of like the serpent of the world of the Ouroboros, essentially the closed world of the serpent, is driven by this principle of electricity. He relates these ghosts to this kind of electrical principle, and then that made me think about Frankenstein.
Yep.
Like, well, Frankenstein is trying to raise the dead through the power of electricity.
Right.
So it's this kind of trying to make good on the promise of the serpent that you will not die, right? Chasing after this kind of like false immortality. I think a lot of times, like, we try to do that with the past. Like we try to through electricity, through artifice, we try to resurrect something from the past to bring it back in a destructive way. Whereas the proper operation is the calling forth, right? That you see in the raising of Lazarus, like the calling forth that essentially doesn't override the will.
No.
Is that what he's meaning when he talks about crystallization as being like the two ways of things being crystallized? Is one comes up from the body, right? And he compares it to the Tower of Babel.
The Tower of Babel versus,
and then the other comes from above.
Yes.
But I think also, for me, when I read this the last time, because I didn't have the vocabulary for it the first time I read it, there is serious research going into seeing if we can actually upload our memories into a virtual domain, right? And transhumanism. So this is exactly what Comberg's talking about here, in a way, anticipating.
Crystallization, you mean?
Crystallization, which means if you upload your memories into a computer program.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Which is connected to the belief that the electrical signals is all that there is, and it loses any sense of resonance.
Well, that gets back to that part where he talked about smiling.
It's like Tron.
Remember? He says, you can reduce smiling down to a bunch of mechanical processes.
Yeah, right. But you haven't explained.
But where's the joy that actually? What's the joy that actually caused that smile? Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
what would a consciousness that were uploaded through technology to the cloud? What would it be? It would be a simulacrum. It wouldn't actually be.
But this is what he says, right?
Real living being.
Page 360. He says, is therefore not purely and simply a matter of an illusion in the case of the ideal and method of the construction of the Tower of Babel. Rather, it is a matter of another kind of immortality.
Yeah, right.
Which goes back to the first thing you mentioned here. Right. Which, notably, that which the serpent of Genesis had in mind when he said, you will not die.
Yep.
If you eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil produces the inner friction in man of the struggle between yes and no. And this friction in its turn produces the electrical fire, which affects the crystallization whose product will resist death. This is the meaning of the promise, or rather the program. What a loaded statement that is, because he didn't mean program.
But think of that
computer program.
Think of that serpent. Right, but think of that in connection to Dante's image of Satan in the lowest level of the Inferno, like encased in ice, right? Like that is that very crystallization.
And he goes on, let me finish this paragraph. This program underlies the millennial-old method of the construction of the Tower of Babel, and it constitutes the esoteric kernel of the hidden secret of, and he emphasizes in italics, materialistic science in general.
Mm-hmm.
That's the apotheosis of materialistic science, of the transhumanist project of combining engineering, computer software, and biology.
Well, because at some level the Gnostics weren't entirely wrong, right?
No.
If all you see as life, if all you see as being involved in life is the continuation of a particular material form, then you do not understand the mystery of resurrection.
Right.
You do not understand. And you will never learn to let go of your life that you may gain it more fully.
So he calls the construction of the Tower of Babel crystallization from below, but then he goes on to say Christian Hermeticism also teaches crystallization, but it is a crystallization from above,
right,
to below. I.e., the crystallization of which Hermeticism itself, insofar as it is philosophy and knowledge, is the product, crystallized mysticism being gnosis, crystallized gnosis being magic, and crystallized magic being this philosophy and knowledge which passes under the name of Hermeticism.
That's right.
And
this
then
is the antidote to what's going on in the world right now.
Right, from above. It has to be from above. And
the sea of glass, Shari.
Yeah. In returning to the question posed at the beginning of this letter, I'm just going to vindicate myself here. Did the serpent of Genesis simply lie? We are now able to answer, no, he did not lie. He opposed to divine immortality another immortality, that of crystallization from below above, or the Tower of Babel. He advanced the bold program, but real and realizable, aiming at a mankind which would be composed of the living and of ghosts, with the latter reincarnating almost without delay and avoiding the way which leads through purgatory to heaven. Mm-hmm. So what came to mind there for me was when Jesus said, can't remember the context, but somebody wanted to go with him and said, but I first have to bury my mother or something like that. And he said, let the dead bury the dead. Right?
Yes.
So John Bear likes to use that as an example of showing us that we're actually not alive.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We're dead. Right?
Which is why ultimately Michael is still right too, right? And so because in a deeper sense, the serpent was lying.
Well,
I agree with Michael Nate completely.
Because the life, the life that he being offered is not true life.
Yeah, well, he goes on. He only vindicates me there, but then he vindicates Michael further on.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what. Which is why he vindicates me, because I said you were both right.
Okay. I'm so bummed out. I have to depart because my sister's here to visit my mom and my wife is not home.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, Michael.
I wanted to get maybe next time we can finish up and talk about reincarnation a little bit.
Let's do it. Yeah, we'll do a two-parter on this one.
Sounds like
okay. Okay. Right. I'll see you guys.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Michael. This will be a wait for part 2, folks.
Okay.